Welcome, everybody, to Wisdom Across Generations, Stories, Lessons, and Reflections. Tonight's program is the vision of our partner, Dr. Catherine Meeks from Turquoise and Lavender, brought beautifully to life. We are absolutely honored to collaborate with her because this conversation so perfectly aligns with Marshawn's mission to lift up the untold stories of the civil rights movement in ways that inspire and equip the next generation of activists. What we're going to do on tonight's call is just a little bit different. We're going to look not just at the stories of the civil rights movement, but what shaped the leadership behind some really important voices. That of Reverend Dr. Paul Smith and Ambassador Andrew Young. And then we're going to hear from a group of inspiring young leaders, their reflections and perspective on how those thoughts and wisdoms and guidance are relevant in today's times. Now, I mentioned Dr. Catherine Meeks, but for those of you who don't know her, she is a renowned scholar, theologian, and the founder of both Turquoise and Lavender and the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing. She has a cadre of impressive credentials behind her, and I encourage you to go to her bio to learn more about her. But just to give you an example, President Joseph Biden awarded her with a Lifetime Achievement and Service Award. She's also received a distinction as one of Georgia Trend magazine's notable women, and she just received an honorary degree from Yale University. Our second guest that you'll hear from tonight is Reverend Dr. Paul Smith. He is one of my dear friends, and he is both a friend to myself and also to Catherine and how we met. He is a pioneering pastor, author, and civil rights leader, and he is also the consummate connector. In fact, he is the person who first introduced Andrew Young to Dr. Martin Luther King, sparking one of the most consequential partnerships in our nation's history. He also, as I mentioned, introduced me and Catherine, bringing this webinar to life. And his entire work has been about bringing people together across race, faith, and generation, and what he speaks to in his book as beloved community. Our final wisdom bearer is Ambassador Andrew Young. He is a legendary civil rights leader, pastor, U.S. Congressman, UN Ambassador, Mayor of Atlanta, and his moral clarity and statesmanship have helped shape both our nation and the world. Together, Dr. Meeks, Dr. Smith, and Ambassador Young embody the wisdom, friendship, and moral courage that have anchored movements for change. And their stories remind us that leadership is as much about humility and listening as it is about action. They will be joined by three remarkable young leaders who I'll invite Dr. Meeks to introduce. Dr. Meeks?
Thank you, Kim. It's wonderful to be here tonight. I'm very excited about this evening and have been looking forward to it for a good bit of time. I want to just explain to the audience that you will be watching the conversation between Ambassador Young and Dr. Smith and me in three segments, and then our panelists will be responding to those segments. We will watch a part and then stop and have some conversation and go back to the videos, and that way you'll have a chance to reflect on it more deeply yourself, as well as listening to our panelists' responses to what they have heard. I'm so honored to be introducing these young folks that are part of my daily life in many ways. Joe Worthy, who's a community organizer and who is the owner of the Strategic Nonviolence Academy and talks about nonviolence as a way of life and teaches people about nonviolence in that way. And Elliot Watts, who's a young attorney here in Atlanta, who has been involved with my work with the Absalom Jones Center and other of the work that I have done here. And I'm so delighted to have him here. We were going to have Serena Bian joining us, but because of some misconnections with the airlines, she is not here, but she is being not replaced, but having a wonderful young woman, Chelsea Glasgow, step in her place. And Chelsea is a social shifter and has worked, it does work with security in the information systems world. But more importantly than all of that, she is very, very deeply committed to issues of justice and working to make sure that justice becomes a real thing in our world. Chelsea's also been my assistant for the last 7.5 years, and we are friends and support each other in many ways. It is so important for us to be having this conversation tonight, and I want to get right into it. I don't want to take any more time. So if we can start with the first segment, and then we'll watch this segment for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll stop and engage with the panel in some conversation. And let me just say how glad I am to be here with you, Reverend Paul Smith and Ambassador Andrew Young, having this conversation about wisdom and what you have learned on this long journey that both of you have been on. And I'm so grateful for you all to take this time to come and be with me. And Ambassador Young, you were about to start to say something.
I think I've just been blessed, and I had a typical Southern black childhood, but the advantage I had was I had two really devout and dedicated Christian parents and grandparents, and my mother had 11 in her family, and my father had 5 in his family, but he was the only boy. And they both grew up in the Deep South when it was almost a death sentence to spit on the sidewalk.
Right.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you didn't do anything that would attract attention or disturb the peace. And my father particularly prepared me to deal with differences, and his motto was, don't get mad, get smart. If you lose your temper in a fight, you lose the fight. And I was living in the middle of a block. My brother and I were the only black children in the block. There were 3 black families in the block. And, but there was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. The Nazi Party was on the third corner, the German-American Bund, and a Chevrolet dealership around the fourth corner. And we were right smack dab in the middle. And I mean, from 4 years old, I was getting lessons on how to get along. And my father took me to see the 1936 Olympic Games on Movietone News because he wanted me to see how Jesse Owens dealt with Hitler. And when Hitler walked out of the track meet after Jesse Owens won the 100-meter dash because he didn't want to present him with the medal. And my daddy said, now watch what Jesse does. And I said, he doesn't seem to be doing anything. He's going on about his business. He's practicing starts for the next race. And he said, exactly. He said, he is not letting this other man's problem become his problem. He's not getting angry. He's staying smart. And he always said, your mind is the most powerful weapon you have. And he was 5'4", and I think I got to about 5'7", maybe 8, I don't know. And he said, you're never going to be able to beat up anybody, everybody. And he said, you probably will, you can hold your own with anybody if you don't lose your temper. And I think don't get mad, get smart is, something that's helped me from 4 years old.
Well, I want to hear you, Paul, respond to that same, like where did you begin with the lesson that was a sustainer through this journey, and that can build on what Ambassador Young just was sharing.
Okay, so somewhat similar to Andy's situation, I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, which is where Notre Dame is, a Catholic university, and a very well-known president, Father Hesburgh, who was very close to, of course, to Dr. King. And Notre Dame was also a very liberal school. And so I knew what a university was like, although at that point, there weren't that many African Americans going to Notre Dame. But my education about what to be and how to act began on my grandmother's porch. My grandmother ran a rooming house, and she was also my Sunday school teacher. And I was kind of, rambunctious when I was growing up, and no one thought I would ever be clergy. And my grandmother kept saying to my parents, leave that boy alone. He's going to be all right. And but I watched all these people coming from work, mostly professional, who would come, get off the bus, walk past Granny's house and say, Ms. Overby, can I come and sit a spell? And of course, she invited them to come and sit. And I was in a rocking chair just next to, almost at the feet of my grandmother. And I wondered what was the magic that all of these people at the end of a long day wanted to have a conversation with my grandmother. And I listened to their conversations, and there was a lot of racial unrest that was going on in South Bend at that time. This is 1935. But I was curious about how I would fit into that kind of environment. But I was buoyed by my grandmother's faith in me and her faith in the Baptist Church in South Bend, Indiana, Reverend White. And so between Granny and Reverend White, I learned, number one, what it meant and how to be in front of a large group of people who had many of the values that I had. I learned how to get along with basically immigrants, because there were a lot of immigrants in South Bend at the time, because there were three major plants: Bendix, Studebakers, and I've forgotten, and Singer sewing machine. And most of the workers there were all white, so I could watch all these white men coming past my grandmother's house, going to work. And I wondered, well, where are the black people? My father was physically very small, so he would never have been able to work in a plant. So I wonder what was the difference there, and why weren't we as black people represented in that? So that was my first awareness of, quote, color. The second was my pastor, who really was my mentor at that time, Reverend White, Bernard L. White. And he kept telling us we could become somebody by getting an education, that the secret to getting beyond the whole racial unrest and the things that were happening racially in South Bend at the time was to get an education. Well, I thought I was somebody because I had been invited to preach at my home church and other churches and so forth. I didn't think I needed an education, and churches were very interested in this kid who was sort of a boy preacher and had some sense. But my grandmother kept saying to me, son, you got to get an education. So I knew there was some value in education. And even when I was offered a part-time job in one of the churches, she appeared at the church with the deacons and said, in essence, leave my grandson alone. He's got to go to college. And so I knew something was magic about education. I didn't know quite what that was at the time, but Granny kept tutoring me, kept making sure I stayed out of trouble, uh, made sure that I spent time in church. I sang in the choir, although I couldn't sing. But most of all, she kept me, she really kept me grounded. And by the time I was 16, I was headed to Talladega College. So it was a wonderful, wonderful growing up period. And I learned a lot about what it meant to be somebody, particularly with education. And one other thing that was good about that, I was fascinated by language. Education taught me how to speak, but also how to use big words. I love big words. I don't know about you, Andy, but I love using those big words. Because that people listen when you use big words. And so I learned how to use big words by going to college and sitting in those English classes and so forth. So that was pretty much my grounding at that time. Granny's porch, rooming house, people from the community coming by, wanting to talk to Odie Overby.
My grandmother began to lose her sight around 80. And I had to read the Bible and read the newspaper and find out what the number was. And
number.
she was fascinated by the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody else in my family believed in gambling. But
did she win?
My grandma was always right, the one that was right. The best decision that maybe we made here in Georgia when I was mayor in 1990 was to legalize the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran for governor to make sure that the guy who would win, and I wasn't concerned about winning, but that we did not take the lottery money and let the state legislature divide it up. So it was, my one issue was that all of the lottery money be used for higher education. And Zell Miller, who was running, my opponent, insisted, much to my delight, that it wasn't enough to have higher education. We had to have preschool also.
Right.
So all the lottery money goes to preschool and higher education. What that has meant in this last decade is Atlanta probably is the most educated city in the world. 60% of Atlanta's citizenry has been to college.
Do you think, Ambassador Young, that your grandmother's propensity for the lottery, for the numbers back, the ticket, do you think that influenced your attitude toward the lottery?
I know it did.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the ones that I said, I don't like gambling. I don't gamble.
Mm-hmm.
I never did. I don't play the numbers. But my grandmama did it, and my grandmama wasn't, I don't know why, but she didn't play but 10 cents or 15 cents.
Yes.
And I said, it's fun for her. And she was also already, by the time I was aware of what was going on, she was hitting 80. And I said, my grandmama wasn't wrong. If she played the lottery, there's some good in the lottery.
Yes. I love that story about the influence of Ambassador Young's grandmother in terms of the lottery, because that really says a lot about who influences us and how we behave as we go forward. I want to take a second and let the audience know that Reverend Paul he wasn't wearing makeup to make himself look like that. He had a pretty severe fall prior to the recording of this conversation, and he was worried about how he looked, and he came anyway. So that is a statement of somebody who knows how to keep his priorities straight. So we're very, very thankful for him. I just want you all to jump in. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes to talk about this segment, and I want you to just jump in, each of you, to talk about what sort of struck you from what they just talked about in terms of the value of having these voices talk about the ways in which they become the human beings that they are. Why don't we start with you, Chelsea, so we don't have to play who's going to start?
All right. Well, I think that was a phenomenal introduction as far as the two talking. I think the biggest thing for me that stood out was Ambassador Young's connection with his grandmother. And even though he didn't play the lottery, he was able to make some good out of it. Usually what we think is that our parents, my parents were a pastor, so therefore I'm a pastor. And I think the key for me was that he took the influence and made it his own. Right? He didn't start gambling because he doesn't agree with gambling, but he was able to see a different perspective. And I think that came from the love that he shared with his grandmother. And I think that may have taught him, hey, I may not agree with what everyone does, but I can see some light. And that bit of optimism that he was able to source to this day, we are benefiting from. Right? Because he wasn't so staunch on what he wanted, but rather was focused on the optimistic part. What can happen? What good can happen? And so I was really happy to hear that. And I also really loved his lifelong lesson of don't get too emotional, actually be smarter. And I think that probably led to a lot of his success. And that is something that millennials and younger, we can really learn from. I think we're very radical. We get the radicalness of it all, but I want to be clear that he was radical, but not emotional, right? He was logical about the actions, and the actions were radical, not the emotional aspect. So I think that also stuck out to me.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I absolutely love the piece about don't get mad, get smart, right? And so much of the work that we do, a dear friend was telling me this the other day, so much of the work that we do is intergenerational, right? And that how we treat our children will influence the generations to come. And so when I think about Ambassador Young's conversation with his father, just sitting there watching Jesse Owens, understanding don't get mad, get smart, and the way in which we were able to go about the civil rights movement, right? Not being overreactive, right? But moving in a very deliberate way. I think that speaks to the wisdom across generations, right? I've done a training and we talk about going to the strategic watchtower, right? Honoring the emotions that you're feeling, honoring that someone's trying to take you off your center, right? But still being able to see the forest for the trees and being wise about your strategic direction. And I think that really distills that lesson there, right? But that lesson was so profound and something that I've learned from reviewing and watching the civil rights movement, and to understand the source of it, right? That it was Andy Young and his father watching Jesse Owens in contact with Hitler or not in contact with Hitler makes it that much more profound, right? And that much deeper of a lesson. And so now we see that through line throughout history. And I think it's a really powerful piece for me.
Thank you. Elliot?
Sure. And again, thank you, Dr. Meeks, for this opportunity. It's so brilliant to hear from you naturally, and now just to hear from Chelsea and Joe. Right. So don't get mad, get smart. That is just a headline that I think can be relevant for my generation as millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, every generation. There's so much that will always be relevant for us to learn from past generations. And it's so inspiring in these conversations to hear Ambassador Young talk about men and women that he was inspired by, who were previous generations. And to be able to see Jesse Owens just on television, and also to get the underlining from his father to say, watch this man, watch his actions, watch how he speaks truth to power. And to young Ambassador Young's surprise, that speaking truth to power was silence. And that silence was meaningful for people around the entire world, speaking up to one of the most awful leaders of our time. I think just want to note quickly that we live in different times now. They're very similar, right? As Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. But the communities that young people are around now are largely electronic, folks who are digitally connected. And I'll say just up front for folks who are just tuning in or are tuning in for a little bit, God made us more than to just be scrolling and complaining machines. Even though that's what we are directed to do on a near daily basis, apparently TikTok users watch about 3 hours of video every day. That's television for Generation Alpha and below. And that's just the digital world. And then, of course, I want to mention just the racial wealth gap that according to the Brookings Institution, white families have about $300,000 in household wealth. Black families, as of 2022, have under $50,000. So these issues that we're going to hear more about as we speak are real. They're different and perhaps more pronounced, but history certainly rhymes. And it's beautiful to hear from the ambassador and reverend.
Well, and I thank you both. Thank you all three so much. And I think one of the things I heard some here in the last 10 years with young activists saying, this is not your father's civil rights movement. I think that missed the point. It is not our forefathers' civil rights movement, but those principles that we are talking about here and that you all have so beautifully brought up, those principles are timeless. And so it's not like it's this era, that era, because there's some things that absolutely just need to be kept as a thread. So let's move on to the next segment so we can see all of this wonderful conversation. Thank you. That's really a wonderful story. And it does kind of get at one of the questions that I wanted to ask the two of you about what has kept you on the path of in many ways, one might say, laying down your life for your brother and your sister in the work you've done, in the activism. So Paul, now that Ambassador Young has told that story, how about if you can say a few words about what has kept you on the path?
Well, what has kept me on the path is fear, and that was fear of my grandfather, my dad's father. His name was Papa, and Papa was like a conductor on one of the local commuter trains there in South Bend. He was also a deacon in the Baptist church a couple of blocks away from the church I grew up in. So when Papa said, "Come in, don't do that, don't use this word," you didn't do it. I mean, I feared him with a passion. I just knew that he was almost like God because he was very deliberate in what he had to say. He never raised his voice. He was very calm. He also had money. Those were good jobs. You know, those guys made good money at that point. So he had a very nice home. We could never go into the living room unless there was something important happening. And if you went in that living room when you weren't supposed to, you would never do it again. You don't have to do that once. So Papa, I really feared Papa. The other person I feared, I didn't tell you, but my grandmother's mother, we called her Mammy. She was also living, and my job was she quilted, but her eyesight, like Andy's grandmother, was failing. So I had to thread her needles. Every day I came home from school, my job was to thread the needles so she could, could finish doing her quilts. And so she was also watching over me. Howard Thurman talks about how his parents and grandparents brooded over him. Well, my grandparents brooded over me, and there's a distinct difference in how my parents watched over me. My grandmothers brooded over me, meaning they wanted to make sure nothing happened to me while we were at their home, and we were at that home pretty regularly because when we came home from school, our parents were working. So we would go to my grandmother's house and, we would do different chores around the house. And she depended on us doing that. But I was very clear of the lines that I didn't cross. The other person was Uncle EJ. Uncle EJ was a numbers runner. And the rule in our house as kids growing up is when we went to Aunt Lois's house, my father's sister's house in Chicago, the rule was you never asked what Uncle Johnny did. That was it. You just didn't know. And we knew something was going on because Aunt Lois had the latest appliances and silverware and so forth. We wondered how could she do that? And she didn't even work. But Uncle Johnny was a numbers runner. He was a gambler, and he made a lot of money. And so the rule was don't ever ask what he did, and don't talk about all the stuff that Aunt Lois had. So I knew there was something that was probably nefarious going on, but I didn't know it at the time. But I knew when we got to Chicago, we were in a different kind of world, and we actually never really saw Uncle Johnny because he'd sleep during the day and he was gone during the night. And by that time, we would have gone back to South Bend. But I did know that it was important for us to respect our elders. And we could be disciplined from Mrs. Fox next door, from the guys in the pool hall across the street from Granny's house. Everybody looked after us. I was more afraid of Ms. Fox than I was my own mother, because Ms. Fox took no prisoner, and she had a son who was my age. His name was Eddie. And Eddie was, like 6'4", big guy. He is scared to death of his mother. So that meant I was afraid of her too. So the whole notion of being disciplined and being, making sure that you did what they called the right thing at the time. You were with the right people. You were not with, the wrong people, meaning, the wrong side of town. All of those things, were happening right in front of me. And I could see there was a difference in where Granny lived and where we lived, where my uncle, who was a dentist, where he lived and where we lived. So I knew there was a difference. And I also knew that it had to do with money. Who had the money? And that has never left me, because I've never had a whole lot of money. Neither has Andy. And it's because we like Howard Thurman said when he went out to San Francisco, Mordecai asked him, who was the president of Howard at the time, said, "How are you going to make it?" And Howard Thurman said, "God's going to take care of me." Well, that's pretty much what I believe. I believe God was going to take care of me, and up to this 90th day, God has in fact taken care of me.
In third grade, I was playing in the back of the room, mumbly peg with an ice pick and another little boy. Well, I went to third grade at 6 years old. He was been around too long. He was almost 11. But I was playing with the big bad boy in the class because I didn't want to get picked on. And as long as he was my friend, he protected me from everybody else, except the teacher. And the teacher put us both out. And I went back the next day because my mother could take off and go to see about me. And he never came back. I ran into him when I was in my crisis year at Howard. I just finished my second year, and I was lifeguard in a swimming pool. He came in and almost drowned. And he was high on something. And when I pulled him out of the water and set him up, he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, where do we know each other? He said, "Miss Sarah Boakland's class in third grade at Bellina C. Jones School." He said, "We both got put out together." I said, "Yeah, what happened? You never came back." And he said, "My mother there were 6 of us, and my mother worked taking care of white folks' homes, and they paid her $1 a day plus car fare, and she could not take time off. Car fare back then was 7 cents, so it was $1.15 a day was what she was making, and he never went back to school. And I said, "Where you been?" He said, "I've been in and out of every jail in Louisiana." And I said I was in school and about to drop out because I didn't want to be a dentist. And that's what my daddy wanted me to be. And I didn't know what I wanted to be. And he said, "Nigga, if you ever drop out, if I ever hear you dropped out of school, I'll track you down anywhere you are and I'll beat the living so-and-so out of you." He said, "You got to get some education because people like me never had a chance. You got a chance. If you don't do something with that chance, you got to answer to me." And so I was getting it on both sides. And it was that balance of the good of my parents and the evil that I was running into on the streets.
Yes.
That kept me, it really kept me in the straight and narrow. Because he was using drugs and he was really high and crazy. And he was wild, and but he had been in every prison and penitentiary almost in the state of Louisiana. And but was and he said, "I'm as smart as you. I just never had the chance you got." I never smoked. I mean, not a single cigarette. And I didn't drink anything until I got to the UN almost.
So I want to ask you all, it just struck me as I was listening, this notion between somebody watching over you and somebody brooding for you. How does that strike you? Do you have people like that in your life? And how do you see that as an important factor? And let's be as concise as possible just with that question. So who wants to start? Whoever.
I'll go ahead. Well, I'd say lately, Dr. Meeks, you've been brooding over me quite, and you feel held, you feel loved. I think especially all the folks in the National Council of Elders, it gives you courage. There are one person told me one time, and I always talk, some people give you courage, right? And when you're doing hard things, when you're faced with the world that we're faced with now and in positions to, hopefully do something about it, you really need people brooding over you, right? Like if things don't go the way that you think they should go, if things get harder than they probably should be, you really need that safety net of people in your community brooding over you. Yeah, and I think it's a critically important piece, and it's been critically important for me in my development as well.
Thank you. Chelsea?
Yeah, sure. I think in a space where this generation seems so independent, so I, pick myself up, I had to do it, so you have to do it. It is so important and relevant for us to speak about folks who care about us, are concerned about us, and will check in on us and hold us accountable. I think that accountability piece, along with the support, is something that we have to take a second look at. It is something that both of the men said. They said, "Hey, it was fear that kept me in line." Why? Because when someone calls you, when Miss Such and Such sees you on her porch, home early from school, you have to answer to that. Whereas nowadays, it's kind of like, mind your business, ma'am. Who are you to talk to me, right? And I think we, in seeking this independence of who can say something to me, what we lose is the support and the accountability and courage that a community who brews can help you with. And so I think it's very important for us to have those people in our lives.
Yes, Elliot.
And just to echo Chelsea's saying, I'm just so grateful, and to answer Dr. Mead's question, grateful to have a mom and a dad, and to have family where I can point myself to a line back generation. And I understand that having grown up in Fayette County, being in the suburban world, that's different from what a lot of children experience now, where when they come home, it might be in an extended stay motel, and they might not know at the end of the week where they're going to be. With SNAP benefits running out, they might not know how they're going to eat this weekend or next month. And so I think the brooding is very limited. I'm fortunate, again, with my church, St. Luke's in Atlanta, that broods over me, that broods over my daughter. But I know that that's not the case for most people. And I know that the need remains for every child. And that divergent path that Ambassador Young talked about, I have to give Ambassador Young credit, because he's like you, Dr. Beeks, he's so humble. Like, yes, he may have been as smart as that other young man. Yes, he may have been given opportunity because of his family and the work that they had done, but it still required him to pick up the mantle, or to pick up the baton, to use the track and field metaphor more, to go the distance. And he did that. And I think that it's incumbent on folks like the three young voices here to be those baton runners, and to make a difference because of the opportunity given, not because of the divergent path that we could say, oh, well, I'll just go this way, instead of making a difference.
And also to understand there's a difference between someone brooding over you and people interfering with your independence. I mean, that to be hyper about, well, I'm a grown up and I can do what I want. Yeah, you can, but it's also important for people to be caring about you and asking questions and inquiring about your well-being. And it's not about, we want to run your life. It's about, we want you to have a good life, a better life, and to be able to see that. Let's move along to the next section. So if we get ahead of ourselves a little bit, we'll have longer at the end for a little longer conversation.
Awesome.
You had these amazing messages given to you as young people, and then you go out into a world that creates a lot of conflict, because you found a lot of, I'm sure, counter messages that you had to work your way through. So how did you do that? College?
I went to college in 1947, and a lot of things happened then. One, Ralph Bunche won the Nobel Peace Prize for the Middle East, the two-state solution. The second thing was that at least a dozen black college presidents were invited to India, I think by Quaker families in Pennsylvania, that paid their way to India so that there were at least a dozen black college presidents there. Mordecai Johnson from Howard, Stuart Nelson, I don't know who was at Talladega again, but Fisk. I mean, all of the black colleges were represented in India. The other thing was that I used to have four things that happened around that time. A little later on, Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. And the recession hit, or depression. I don't know, the Second World War started around that time, and Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And Emmett Till got killed.
Yeah, the early 50s.
And all of this was in the late 40s, early 50s.
Right.
Many memories keep springing up just hearing Andy tell his story, because our stories are also very similar. So when Emmett Till was killed, I was in a car with the basketball team from Talladega. Driving to we were going to Itta, Mississippi, to one of the black colleges there, and we heard it on the car radio that Emmett Till had been killed, and we were scared to death. I was like 17 years old, and my brother was also on that basketball team. And in fact, most of us who were on the team, who were on the starting team, we were Northerner. We were from the North. The other players were from the South and had not had the kind of basketball. I came from Indiana. Indiana was a basketball state, but I remember how frightened I was in the coach's car, because we didn't have buses then. The coach drove his personal car, and someone else from the administration drove another car. So there were just 10 of us in those two cars, and I just remember being panicked that we were in the state of Mississippi and all these things had been happening.
Yeah.
So I really was frightened by that.
You were caught in the tragedies of life, but you also saw the conquest of life by people that you admired. The other thing is that I never understood the significance of it, but I was 9 years old, and my teacher took us to see Thurgood Marshall in a federal court case. And I didn't know what they were saying, but all I knew was this tall, skinny black man was in charge of that court, it seemed. And when he would cite a case, and the clerk would go back in the back to get the law book, when he came back and gave the book to the judge, Thurgood would say, "Your Honor, I think you find that in the upper right-hand corner on page 296. I said, "Damn."
Yes.
I just put it together.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I was exposed to a lot of good and evil.
Right.
Right about the time I was 12. From 10 to 15.
And Paul?
Yes. The other thing that Andy brought to mind for me was the importance of the NAACP and I've forgotten the name of Andy, you may remember the big black church in Chicago where Joe Jackson was the pastor. Well, Adam Clayton Powell and others, they just held forth in those big churches. So whenever they were in town to preach, they had, people, the Klan was throwing acid on the cars outside, although those of us who were attending, going to hear these ministers, these people, they were throwing acid on our cars. So every Friday, I would leave Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, with about 5 other students, maybe 10, in my psychology professor's car, and we'd drive to Montgomery to hear Dr. King and to hear Adam Clayton Powell. So I knew something important was going on. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to be a part of it, but I knew I should be a part of it. And it wasn't until I really met Andy that I understood the significance of all of those wonderful speakers, basically from Chicago and Detroit, coming to Talladega, talking about the importance of the civil rights movement, an opportunity for African Americans. And because of that, I really just did, my fear went away, because I felt I was protected by the significance of these ministers. They were well known. They were unafraid. They got things done. They put their lives in danger, like Andy did. And so I was beginning to get the feel for something greater in my life. and it didn't come into being until to Andy's substitute. There was fear that Dr. King, who was invited to speak at my college, that if he didn't come, they needed a backup, and Andy was that backup, and that's where I met Andy. And so he was the backup for that.
Tell him how you got me there.
I just love it that those guys have been friends for 70 years and they have such wonderful respect and regard for one another. And I want you to just jump in with whatever struck you in that little segment. Elliot, why don't you start?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mead. Sure. I love hearing about their friendship too. And I think that friendships in our generation and other generations are so important, especially ones going up and down intergenerationally, folks who are older and folks who are younger too. And I think what's wild too, when I hear, say, Reverend Paul talk about how he drove right from Talladega College down to Montgomery just to hear the words and see the presence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, patron saint of Atlanta. What's wild is that today we can access every single speech that Dr. King has ever made. We can access every speech that's made by a political leader from around the world throughout time. And the issue for us, rather than like in today's world in 2025 and going forward, is filtering out the mess and focusing on the brilliance that's out there for us to learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Chelsea?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Filtering out the mess. Right now, we have a surplus of information. And so it is very difficult to see, now, whose voice am I hear a lot of voices, but who do I listen to? Right. And I think one of the things that I love about Reverend Dr. Paul, is he started out saying how when he was younger, fear is what kept him in line. Fear is also what made him drive, right, with his friends. He was concerned about what was happening. And because he was with the collective of his friends, he felt safe enough to go. And when he found his safety, it was with the words of wisdom. It was with the leaders who were doing the work. And so I think fear is what really stuck out to me from the last clip and this one as well, because I saw how it evolved from literally being scared to do right, and then being scared, if I don't do right, this is what's going to happen, And so I think that fear is very, very powerful, and that's something that resonates with me a lot.
Yes. Joe?
Yeah, and the whole time I was watching that, I kept thinking about this idea of tragedy versus the conquest of life, right? And the question that I think has sort of been hinted at by Elliot and Chelsea is sort of who is narrating that tragedy and who is narrating that conquest, right? And I think that's what we're having an issue with now, and that so much of that is without narration. So many things. What I haven't heard is 10 steps to do this or 5 steps to do that, and any of those things, because there was sort of this guiding philosophy that you see through this whole story, right? That started from childhood, brooding over all the way up until the point where they're scared to do the wrong thing, right? And they're scared that they don't do the right thing, right? And I think that's critically important, that we move. I don't want to say back. I want to say towards a space where we understand that it's more than just these 10 steps to this thing or that thing, but it's important to ground ourselves in a philosophy for life, right? And that takes brooding, and that takes caring, and that takes relationships from generation to generation that has a dynamic that goes both ways, right? And we see the possibility in that a young person or, ourselves, we can look at a situation, narrated in our minds because of the contact that we've had maybe with you, Dr. Meeks, or other folks in our lives, and we can then go and make the right decisions, right? And I think that's relationships, that's leaderships, that sustains movements, right? It doesn't end after the 10 steps, right? But it's really a way we're going to live our life and how we're going to respond to the tragedy and the conquest, And I think that's critical.
Joe, your work with Reverend Lawson and the training nonviolence as a way of life rather than a strategy for social change, even though strategically it was a good thing, but it's got to be more than just that. And so, here you are, this young person with that understanding, as we embrace the violence in this culture, that nonviolence as a way of life is still a viable thing. You didn't just wake up one morning with that. You've been on a path that has led you to that place.
Absolutely. Several conversations, several conditions that sort of have I guess you could say like a GPS signal on the back of my head, right? And I think there's a lot of parenting books. I'm a parent, so read a lot of parenting books, and it's like, you can't give your kids really a map quest, right? You sort of have to create conditions for them to have a GPS signal in their body, right? Where they know this is the right turn or this is the wrong turn, right? We can't be there every time. And so these conversations are critical to help us understand, again, in that tragedy and conquest, like what steps we take next, right? And it can't be distilled to a blog post or a TikTok.
And in the language of the old folks, that's called conscience.
Yep.
Yeah, it operates like a GPS, but it's that inner voice, that inner sense of that you brought up, Chelsea, of knowing I'm scared, but if I don't do this right thing, it's going to be worse than if I do it, regardless of what might be the price I'm having to pay for it. So, that's there. It's in the psyche. It's not something you can get when you need it. It has to be there already. It won't, it's not instantaneous.
Yeah. It has to be developed. The discernment has to be developed through time, experience. And one way that we can accelerate our discernment or our growth is by having these conversations, is by listening to the wisdom and seeing what resonates and sticks and say, wait a minute, there's something to that. I think one of the things that I had to learn just in life in general is that there is no way to succeed in one area and not succeed in another. Whatever you do in one area will be the way you respond in other areas. We have this idea that, well, I'll be this person when I go to work and I'll be this person when I come home. And to a sense, I understand there is professionalism, right? That you can, and you can be personal when you get home. However, the character that calls you needs to be the exact same. And I think that's one thing we can see with Reverend Paul and Ambassador Young. They have been groomed and been making decisions, which adds to their character. The grooming adds to their parent structure. But the fact that they decided to comply and say, you know what, I will do the right thing, that is they have been conditioned. And so now when they are in situations that call for them to rise, they can make that decision because they've been conditioned. And so I think it's just so important to point that out, that that any change you want to make isn't instantaneous. It is something that will take time, and more than time, personal development and character development, so that you can even discern what you need to be doing and who to listen to.
Yeah, so let's move along and listen to a little bit more. So we can, and we have one more section after this one, and then we can have a little more of a lengthy conversation when we have the last section. So we'll go now to the next section. I want the two of you to talk about your friendship, because friendship is one of the keys to being able to live in the world without crumbling in the midst of trouble. And you all have a 70-year friendship, of 70 maybe plus.
There were that group that invited me to Talladega really had invited Martin Luther King.
Yes.
And they realized that they put his picture on the front of Time magazine, and they thought he might not be able to come. And they called me and asked me if I would come as a backup in case he had to cancel. So it was a blessing, and I was honored because I had seen him once, but I'd never met him.
And Paul, you want to say a little bit more about that time now?
See, Andy kind of saved my life because as I was sort of a popular not only a speaker but athlete. My brother and I at Talladega, and so I really didn't know much I was halfway smart, but I really wasn't smart like Andy was. So when I met the brother, I said, "This is a smart brother. You know, not only he's smart, he's good looking. All the girls liked Andy. He didn't tell you that. All the girls just swooned over Andy. I said, "What's the magic about this? About this? About this guy? Who is this guy?" Right? But it was so important to learn what his pastorate was. He was a little town in Georgia, and there was something about it. And at the end of that, I don't know if you remember, Andy, it's when you invited me, because I was graduating that same year from Talladega. You invited me to come to Savannah, Georgia, and get involved in the movement. And I told you that why did I need to do that? And you kept telling me that I needed to do that. Well, my dad had given me $100 and the car when I graduated from Talladega. And I said, Andy, do you realize how much $100 is? And I went to Detroit where my sister lived. I had everything going for me. And so I was really, doing all this with another classmate by the name of Richard English, who had been accepted to graduate school at the University of Michigan. Long story short, we're riding by late one night, and we go past the Woodworth Methodist Church in downtown Detroit. And on the marquee, there was the words, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, the president of Morehouse College, was our guest preacher. And you know what his title was? Everywhere I turn, I find Jesus. It stopped me in my tracks. Just stopped me in my tracks. And Richard said, "What's wrong with you, man?" I said, "Man, I gotta come hear Dr. Mays." And he said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "Man, in those days you were required to go to chapel at those black schools." He says, "Why would you want to go to church? You just graduated. Why would you want to do that?" But I insisted, so I went to church, heard and met Dr. Mays. I went back, told Richard, Andy has wanted me to come down and join the movement, and I'm going to go. And he said, "Good luck with that." So I went, I took the car back, took my dad's car back. I gave him, I had like $60 left, gave him the money. And it's the first time in my life I had seen my father cry because he knew the significance of the decision I had just made. So I joined Andy and his family down in Savannah, Georgia. And my whole life, Andy is kind of flipped out when he's always getting off that Trailways bus. He met me there, and there I was. And my whole life changed, and I met his family. His kids were small at that point. Beautiful wife Jean at the time, and it was the beginning of my life changed forever. And that's why we're have the kind of friendship we have today.
Let me go back to 1951 when I left Howard, because I graduated from Howard University at 19. Oh, thank you, Lordy. And I was majoring in biology and chemistry, and I really wasn't interested. But my daddy wanted me to be a dentist, and I didn't have the courage to tell him I wasn't interested in that. But he thought that dentistry was security, that he said you could make $10,000 a year, and that means you could send your children to college, and you could own your own home. And that was his goal for me. And I didn't see that, and I knew dentistry, I appreciated his dentistry, and I had worked in dental laboratories, as had my brother, in the summer. But on the way back from Howard, we stopped at Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and there was a congregational high school there, normal school, and my parents wanted to go to that meeting, and I wasn't interested in that. And so I'd been on Howard's track team, so I went out for a run. Well, in the mountains, you never running flat. You're running either up a hill or slightly downhill. I was running downhill and I was running too fast. But when I got to the base of Kings Mountain, I pushed myself to go to the top. And I don't know what happened, but I kind of passed out a little while. But when I woke up, I looked out and everything just seemed perfect. I mean, the sky was, blue, which is not unusual, but for some reason that sky glistened and the cornfields glistened and the leaves looked like it was early in the morning, like they still had dew on them, that they were sparkling like diamonds. And it suddenly hit me that everything I saw had a purpose. And I said, there can't be a purpose for the trees and the cows and the cornfield, and whoever made all this didn't make a purpose for me. And I decided that, well, whenever I find something that nobody else wants to do, and I think it needs doing, that's my purpose.
And I want the audience to know that MSNBC has done a marvelous documentary on Ambassador Young called Doing the Dirty Work, because he said that he made up his mind to, you heard him say, to do what nobody else wanted to do. And he went on to call it The Dirty Work. And so they named the documentary Doing the Dirty Work. And we know people can, about him, and if you don't, you can Google him and learn all of the ways doing the dirty work took him from being a local pastor to being ambassador to the United Nations and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's just have you say a word or two about that segment, and let's listen to the last one, and then we can be a little more relaxed in the last part of our conversation together. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Sorry.
Is it ladies first? The times. I love that. Wow. I think the epiphany that Ambassador Young had was really important. Number one, because, he's in a family that brooded over him, that really supported him, and that wanted the best for him, which is probably why they recommended dentistry. It worked for them. It was going to work for him, but to be able to have the courage and be able to stand on their shoulders and say, you know what, I think it's a little something different that I'm supposed to be doing. And to have an open mind enough to say, this is bigger than my sustainability. This is a conversation about purpose. And if we're talking about purpose, then I'm going to have to say no to being a dentist and yes to something else, even if I don't know what that is in this moment of me, basking in the sun and looking at the trees and the stars, right? And so I think that really stood out to me, his courage to say no. And and more importantly, the intentional decision not to say no because, this is what daddy wants me to do, but rather choosing, it's saying no, but saying yes to my purpose and trusting that my purpose is going to get me to be sustained. Really stood out to me. Yes, thanks. Go ahead, Elliot.
Oh, thank you. And I just affirm everything that Chelsea just said, and also just that America the Beautiful moment for Ambassador Young. And just a note for our listeners, the African American freedom movement started when the first Black person landed on America. And we had learnings. We stand on the shoulders of giants over time. There were slave results that were brutally put down back in the 1800s and before. We had to learn as Black people how to be nonviolent leaders, like Joe is carrying that forward today. So hearing about Ambassador Young, really, I hear him saying, this is my country. This is my ownership. I have a purpose. And it's wild to even think that someone as talented as him would question whether he had purpose. But to see him say, okay, I have a purpose. This land is beautiful. I can help bring the beauty out through my dirty work. It's just so inspiring and important.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, this was just like really great for me. The first thing I'll say is be careful who you raise your children to be, right? because they may not choose security. And I've one of the things that I wrote down is this idea of security versus liberation, right? Mm-hmm. Like they're not the same thing. And I think Ambassador Young chose liberation, right? And I think what Elliot is speaking to, especially with the slave revolts that we don't talk about enough, is right. People chose liberation over security. You know what I mean? And we are right at a crossroads right now between security and liberation. And security calls that, that comfort, that regular thing, the roof over your head and all that stuff. And liberation risks some of those things, and we need, speaking of friendship, those friendships, that friendship, that camaraderie, to consistently choose liberation, right? When we're faced with those things. And I thought that was just like critically, powerful to lift up this idea of, we need to choose liberation over security in this moment. And what does that look like for us?
Yes, and let's move to the last section so we don't find ourselves racing to the finish line, needing to wrap up. But I have one last thing I wanted to ask the two of you to respond to, and that is, what do you have to say to this current generation about surviving in the world that they find themselves having to live in, given your own long journeys and the conflicts and ways in which you have described so many wonderful grounding things. I mean, your grandmothers and their faith and your own faith, and now just your stories about how you got into the work you did. I mean, both of you described really spiritual experiences that led you.
I don't think we were thinking of them as spiritual then.
Right,
No,
absolutely not. Because that's right.
No,
yeah,
no.
In retrospect, that's why I want you to talk about it a little bit, because I think that someone having that same kind of experience might not think of it that way either. People tend to, it's a coincidence or, it's an accident.
But most things.
Coincidence.
Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's lovely.
None of us really knew what we were doing.
Exactly.
But we all knew that what we were doing, God had something to do with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
I think, I don't know when you come to realize that you are not in control of your own life. But it's whenever I find something that nobody else wants to do, and I think it needs doing, I try to figure out a way to get it done. And I
love that.
There's nothing that I have done successfully, or even my failures, I didn't know about them the day before they happened.
Yes,
and I didn't know I was going to be meeting Martin Luther King till the day before it happened. I didn't know whether he was going to show up and I was going to have to fill in for him, but he showed up.
And then you met him because you were going to be the substitute. Yeah.
We ended. They were generous and they let us both talk.
Mm-hmm. My experience, I mean, if there's such as a spiritual experience, it was watching you and Dr. King, knowing that you had just met, and how you just, Howard Thurman would say, how you all just is together. And there was something happening inside of me that was deeply moving, just watching the two of you. Because I was at that time, I was probably 21. And that was another thing. We were too young to be afraid, and we just didn't care. I never cared. I was never afraid of anything, but I knew something was happening because of how you and Dr. King connected while you were at Talladega.
Well, by that time, I had also, when I first went to Thomasville, about a year before that, I was met by, it seemed like 1,000 Ku Klux Klansmen.
Goodness.
And we had just moved into this little parsonage and kind of fixed it up ourselves. We had to put up sheetrock and put down asphalt tile and build a fireplace. And we had a Georgia country parsonage. And when we saw this group of Klansmen, I asked Gene, I said, now, if they come to get us, I'm going to go down and talk to them. But I want you to sit in the window with the rifle and point the rifle at the one I'm talking to. She said, I can't do that. I said, but you're a good shot. She said, we used to shoot tin cans in her backyard. And she was really a good shot. And I said, why? Why can't you do that? She said, I cannot point a gun at a human being. I said, damn, woman, that's the Ku Klux Klan. She said, yeah, you're supposed to be a preacher. I said, what's that got to do with it? She said, well, if you don't know that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, maybe you need to do something else. And I said, what do you mean? I said, if they throw a firebomb on the front porch of this shack, it goes up in smoke and we all die. And she said, so? You've been preaching about the cross and the resurrection. I said, damn, woman, are you a fool? She said, it sounds like you are. And she just refused to think of violence. Where she went to school in Indiana was a Church of the Brethren school. And she had a year course in New Testament nonviolence. And she was beating me up with it.
Yeah.
And, but I finally called some of the deacons and they suggested that we talk to the mayor. And I called the mayor and he said that he would get right back to me. And he talked to two people in Thomasville, the two largest employers, and both of them said that they didn't want the Klan there. And they told the mayor to keep the Klan on the courthouse steps. Don't let them march in the black community. And send a couple of police cars down to the church because John Wesley Dobbs was going to kick off the voter registration drive that Sunday after church. And but it all seemed to work out if you follow your faith and your principles.
Yes. Yes. I'm so grateful to both of you for this wonderful conversation. And I think that these stories and your helping us to realize what the value is of having community and family and elders, your grandparents and others that support you, believe in you, and push you forward. And I do know for a fact that many of our young people in this generation are missing that factor. That the grandparents are 30 years old. I do believe that stories and conversations like this one can be helpful to them and to all of us, because as we listen, it's really wonderful, and I'm so grateful to the two of you. I do want to let the audience know that Reverend Paul had a fall, and that he does not make up that he has on, but it's from having fallen. And we're so glad you're doing well enough to be here with us. And Ambassador Young, thank you. It is such a wonderful delight to have had this opportunity to be a facilitator in this conversation. Thank you all for your generosity to spend this time with me. But more than that, thank you for listening to your heart, to the spirit, and whether you were going kicking or screaming or saying yes, it doesn't matter. You've been on a good journey that's meant a lot to all of us, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you so much.
Well, God bless you, and thank you for getting us together.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you both. Oh, they make me want to cry. I love being with them. So last words here. We've got just a handful of minutes to wrap up. But what last words do you come to you and strike you from that segment and from any other thing you have to say from this whole time together? And why don't we start with you, Joe?
Oh, I thought we were going to do ladies first. So I wasn't quite ready. No, I think the whole story is critically important from childhood all the way up into those last moments in the segments about how important the intergenerational influence and conversation was and is in this process. I think, and I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat too around how do we create these conditions for the next generations, right? And I think part of it is spaces like this, but then beyond spaces like this, right? If folks are out in the community, I can almost guarantee that there are young folks in that community, whether they're Gen Z activists and organizers working against all the oppression that's happening right now, or if they're some young folks just trying to figure out the right thing to do. All those folks need brooding, right? And if you are a younger person, and you feel you're in the need of brooding, one, reach out, please do. But also know that, there are a lot of elders in the community, including, our community, that want to reach you, hold you, ensure that you're on the right path and that you have what you need. I know there's a loneliness epidemic with the Gen Z generation, and it's critically important that we say out loud that if you need someone to talk to, if you need a community to be in, if it's not there, we'll build it. And that's, may not be the work that a lot of folks don't want to do, but that's the work that we're charged to do, and that's the only way we get through these times, is building the spaces we need to move ourselves forward.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Chelsea?
Yeah. Only one thing? Okay. All right. So I think the major takeaway that I would take from this is how principles are perennial. It started with the grandparents and the family members, and they were able to grab onto that and then embody those principles and just make some decisions independently of those grandparents and family members. And so I think what that means for me today is assess yourself. What principles do I have and what do I stand on, right? So that we can be an example. The Bible even talks about, in my research, I have a master's of divinity, but in the Bible, it always talks about you can overcome by the blood of the Lamb, right? And the word of your testimony. So it's really about your lived experiences. That's the character that I take from that scripture. Your lived experiences is what's going to ignite someone to even come to you and tell you that, hey, I need some help. Or have someone come to you, or have you go to someone else, right? I think open for that community is really important if we want to have that strong intergenerational connection. And if we saw anything with the interviews tonight, it is that because of the intergenerational connection, we were able to have these two jewels. Now the question is, what connections are you making? But beneath you and above you, right? And so those are my takeaways.
Thank you. Elliot?
Sure, Dr. Mason. Thank you again for this opportunity and conversation. I think 3 quotes from Ambassador Young just will stick with me forever, right? So don't get mad, get smart, that he learned from his father. Coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
And then I love what he heard from that friend of his that underneath that sheet is a child of God, right?
Right.
So even in this world where folks are non-accountable online, they have Instagrams, Facebook, TikToks where they don't have a profile picture and they say all vitriol, et cetera, here, that, and the other, that those people are children of God too. And the folks who are the furthest on the right, the furthest on the left, the furthest up, furthest down, that God loves them. God knows their names. And then last piece would just be how, getting back to what Chelsea mentioned about the Ambassador Young realizing that this was his moment. So, right, like David in the Bible, he wasn't supposed to be the leader. He was the youngest child. Given a slingshot against Goliath, that wasn't supposed to work. Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, he wasn't supposed to be the big leader within that family. So God will reach down, pull you up, put you out there. And I think that for folks in Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials, people who think, oh, hey, when I went to Howard, I'm not a Howard graduate, but just to use a numeric example, I saw that Howard cost $40,000 a year to go to, and that it was about $400 a year when Ambassador Young was there, which is $10,000 in today's money. There's a difference there. But folks today may be so beaten down by tuition costs. This person is this height or has this Instagram following. They're so much more special. You have a purpose and you can make a difference. And by learning from folks who are older and younger, that's how we push the ball forward.
Right. And I want to say that I'm going to be 80 in February, and old people have to get off of you gotta be my friend. You don't have to be my friend. I have wisdom to share, care to share, and I will share it. And then if the young person wants to be my friend, fine. I'm not going to usurp anybody or disrespect anybody, but I'm going to be loving and kind and wise, whether it's popular or not. And that's, to me, that is one of the major things that for my generation to do, is to quit worrying about popularity and become more concerned about what is it that these 80, 90 years we've lived on the earth has brought us to understand and to be compassionate. I have yet to find any young person who's been disrespectful for me when I have been trying to be caring. I have not ever had that experience, and I don't expect to ever have it. So thank you all, Joe, Elliot, Chelsea, and thank you, audience, for your presence, and our apologies that we don't have time to go into all of your questions. But please, this session and the actual conversation with Andrew Young and Paul Smith will be available on our YouTube channels and websites. Please take them and use them and do your own programs and set up panels like this. We do this because we want to model a way for us to begin to make these conversations more common. So please take advantage of all of them, and be sure to visit the Strategic Nonviolence Academy, the March On Fest, and Turquoise and Lavender, and Social Shifter. And Elliot has his information there in case someone is looking to have a lawyer. Now I want to see where Kim is. Kim, can you come back to just say goodbye? And thank you all so very much. And we're so grateful for the time you have spent with us this evening.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here today. Dr. Meeks, that was really brilliant. And I have enjoyed the opportunity to get to work with you and to see this vision of yours come to life. And you told me when we first met that you had 3 incredible young leaders to come and bring forward their wisdom. And I feel like I learned so much from them. And in particular, I'm really going to be thinking a lot about the change in society and how this sort of move towards independence has really left a void. And pair that with the wisdom of Andy Young saying, or I shouldn't say Andy, Paul says Andy all the time. So now I'm saying Andy, but Ambassador Young would be the appropriate thing to say, speaking about whenever he finds something that nobody else is doing, he steps in and figures out a way to get it done. So I'm going to pair those two things together and see if there's a role that I might play in helping to fill that void. And I hope other people, as you listen to this webinar, that you too will fill a void that you see in the world that is much needed now.
Yes.
So thank you to everyone for being a part of this, to Ambassador Young, to Reverend Smith, to you, Dr. Meeks, to our three young leaders who brought so much to this. And if you've enjoyed this webinar, I encourage you, we will have a series of continuing webinars from March on. Our next webinar, it should come up on the screen, is scheduled to take place on Tuesday, November 18th at 7 p.m. It is a replay from one of our March On Festival programs, Grown Folk Talk Ground Rounds on women's and men's health. So I encourage you to tune in for that one. It has a fabulous, fabulous group of people: Linda Goler-Blount, Dr. Georges Benjamin, Dr. Stephen Thomas, Dr. Sharon Malone, and Dr. Tamara Wilds-Lawson. So if you missed that at the festival, I encourage you to tune in. It really is a great and inspiring conversation that really encourages people to become better self-advocates for their health and to understand the environment that we're operating in and what that means for your own health. So with that, I will close things out. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us today, and let's together march on. Thank you.